This is part one of 2 parts. We're talking about sharpening your communication skills. You might say, well, I'm not a public speaker. If you are a leader, you better be working on your speaking skills. The first thing we need to recognize is most of us are not nearly as good as we think we are. Just watch a video of yourself sometime and you're going to recognize, oh my gosh, I'm not that good. I do this all the time and it's incredibly humbling. Sometimes I'll ask someone who spoke, I'll say, how did it go? And that person will say, well, I really liked it. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter how we feel about our speaking. The question is, was it effective? Well, how'd you do? Well, I liked it. I don't care if you liked it or not. Are we effective as communicators? George Bernard Shaw says this. I love this quote. He says, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Let me say it again. He said, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that has taken place. 3 thoughts, if you're jotting this down. I always tell myself this. Just because you say something doesn't mean they heard it, believe it, or will do it. I tell our communicators all the time, just because you said it does not mean that they heard it, believe it, or will do it. You can say it all day long, but that doesn't mean you're effective in communication. How you say it matters. Just because you said it doesn't mean they heard it, believe it, or will do it. So, when communicating, one of the first rules of effective communication is this. We must never, ever be me-centered. We're always you-centered in communication. Let me say it again. We are not me-centered. We are you-centered in communication. Why is this? Because people are not thinking about me. They're thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. Let me give you some examples. For illustration, at our church, we have something that's called Open Door. It's a place for new people to come and to find out how they can use their gifts, get involved in the church. So let me give you kind of 2 invitations. The first one is going to be a me-centered or a we-centered or an us-centered invitation. The second one is a you-centered one. So the first one is me-centered. I might say, hey, everybody, I'd love to invite you to come to Open Door to find out about our church. We want you to know about our history, what we believe, how you can help us do what we're called to do. Okay, that's a me-centered way of inviting them. Now, in communication, here's basically saying the same thing, but from a you-centered point of view. We might say, hey, what I want you to know is you matter to us. Would you consider joining us at a thing we call Open Door? Why? Because we want to get to know you. We want to hear your story. You might have questions or you have ideas. We would love to help you get plugged in so you can make a difference, okay? Essentially, the same announcement, but from 2 totally different perspectives. The most effective communicators are not going to be me-centered. We're going to be you-centered in communication. Now, you may not be announcing something at a church. You may be running a meeting. You may be pitching some kind of idea at your office or whatever. When people roll into the meeting or when they roll into your planning session, let me tell you what they might be thinking about. They might be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm late. I hope I'm not in trouble. They might be thinking, how in the world am I going to get one kid to soccer and another kid to dance tonight? They might be thinking, I'm really mad because my husband didn't say goodbye to me this morning. They might be thinking, I hope my boss, that means you, doesn't have some stupid idea that's going to burn out in 2 weeks. Other words, what they're doing is they're thinking about themselves. If someone walks into my church this weekend, they might be thinking, I hope the cute girl is greeting at the door. I can't wait for the donuts. I'm stoked to see 2 friends from work, or I'm really nervous because this is my first time and I don't know what I'm going to think at church. In other words, they're thinking about themselves. What we need to do is grab their attention. We'll talk more about how to do that in next month's podcast, but all the time, because they're thinking about themselves, the most effective communicators will be you-centered in communicating. Now, before you communicate anything, you're going to want to answer these 3 questions. Crazy important. Never forget this. Before you communicate anything, you want to answer these 3 questions. Number 1, what do I want people to know? Number 2, what do I want them to feel? Number 3, what do I want them to do? What do I want them to know, feel, and do? Again, it may seem obvious, this is what I want them to know, but you have to start there and be very clear on exactly what you want them to know. Then that's where most people stop. You don't just want them to know something, but you want them to feel something. Why? because emotion moves people to action. What do you want them to feel? You may want them to feel motivated. You may want them to feel challenged. You may want them to feel hopeful. You may want them to feel kind of righteously angry. But the emotion is what's going to move them to action. So not just what do I want them to know, but also what do I want them to feel? And then what is the when? What do I want them to do? And this is really important. If you can't define it, they won't do it. If you can't define it, they won't do it. So we're not just making an announcement, we're leading people to a desired outcome. We're not just leading a meeting, we're moving people toward a specific focus. What do I want them to know? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to do? We're never just communicating. We're always leading. We're always leading. We're always leading. Great leaders are great communicators. Great communicators are great leaders. We never just communicate. We're always leading. Let's review and then deal with some questions. George Bernard Shaw said this: the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Just because you said it doesn't mean they heard it, believe it, or will do it. So when we communicate, we start with the listener in mind. We're always you-centered in our communication, never me-centered in communication. And before we communicate anything, we're going to ask, what do I want them to know? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to do? Because if we can't define it, they'll never, ever do it. We're never just talking. We're always leading.